welcome you to News Platform's discussion on is the NDA Anti Environment. Since the NDA government came to power in 2014, there has been an assault on India's environment protection framework. As the world moves consciously towards stricter and more comprehensive regulations to combat climate change and environmental degradation, the NDA has systematically undermined environment laws. It has opened up rich forest areas to coal mining, diluted coastal regulations and pollution norms for thermal plants, and eroded the like the GT. Air pollution, especially in the capital city, water shortage, unseasonal floods and droughts are becoming increasingly frequent. In 2019, India ranked 177 out of 180 in the Environment Protection Index. It is therefore most surprising that the draft EIA does not seek to address any of these concerns, but rather dismantles India's protection paradigm and gives a free pass to corporates and industries to escape liability. It proposes several controversial amendments which are not just detrimental to environment and public health, but also highly undemocratic. Given this, we are privileged to host Mr. Pradyut Bordoloi, who is an MP, Lok Sabha and former Minister for Environment and Forest, Assam. Mr. Ashish Kothari-ji, who is an eminent environmentalist and founder of Kalpariksh. And Kanchi Kohli-ji, who is a senior researcher at Center for Policy Research. Pradyut sir, let me begin with you. The proposed environment impact assessment has created 40 different categories of industries that stand exempted from the need for clearances. This includes, amongst others, clay and sand extraction, solar thermal power, construction, and that are the biggest contributors to environmental degradation. Has the NDA reduced the entire environment protection framework to a dispensable obstacle? And how will this post-facto clearance that is now being proposed affect current environmental laws?
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. You see, it's very clear that the NDA government, the current NDA government is following a pattern. They want to, liberalize, they want to do away with all the regulatory rules, the checks and balances for protecting the biodiversity, protecting the environment. They are very clear. Actually, this government is run by a very clear-cut business policy. They want to, give away everything to the private sector, to private enterprises, and they want to basically facilitate, kind of one window clearance kind of thing. They want to facilitate in the bargain. They want to destroy the environment and biodiversity. It's very clear right from the word go. When Mr. Modi took over since 2014, they have been undermining the institutions, those were set up, the regulatory bodies. For example, the National Green Tribunal, I just want to give you one example. You see, I belong to the Northeast. So National Green Tribunal used to have bans in Calcutta for the entire eastern region. For last 3-4 years, nobody's there. The National Green Tribunal is dysfunctional. It doesn't work. No judge has been assigned to National Green Tribunal. So one has to go to Delhi. You have to file your complaints or, file a case or something. And it is not heard properly. Cases are piling up. Similarly, one after another, they are diluting everything. We know it. It's not only EIA of 2020. Before that, Forest Rights Act 2006. The forest dependent community, that this particular rights were given to the people who live in the fringe area of the protected forest area, so that they can, derive livelihoods from the reserve forest. The joint forest management policies and programs have been done away with. Similarly, basically our challenges today under this regime is climate change. They are not addressing the way they should have it. climate change, pollution, and biodiversity destruction. These are the major challenges. And they are, whatever regulatory regime that earlier we used to have, they have been very systematically diluting that. So it is a matter of grave, grave concern for all of us. Yeah.
Right, sir. Kanchi ma'am, the 2006 Forest Rights Act recognized the rights of Adivasis over natural resources. However, amendments to the Mines and Minerals Act, the amendments to the Indian Forest Act, amongst others, dilute the role of the Gram Sabhas and give unbridled powers to the bureaucracy to arrest and even shoot anyone. Now, the EIA curtails the process of public consultations and participation of communities. What will be the impact of these policies on Adivasis, and how does it in turn affect the environment?
See, I think there are a few parts to your question. The first part is about how the government has dealt with the Forest Rights Act per se, and so there again, you need to break it up and understand it from the point of view of slowing down the rights recognition process, and at the same time opening up these areas to projects like highways, coal mines, power plants, etc. So the interface between Forest Diversions and Forest Rights Act is that there needs to be consent before diversion takes place. So if you actually, or there needs to be the recognition of rights process completed before diversion takes place. So but it needs to be seen as when you try and slow down one part of the process and really hasten the other part of the process, it appears to be a one-sided process of converting a certain land where livelihoods are dependent. There are people's cultures, identities which are very deeply connected, and you're looking at land use change there. You're looking at many rights of use, habitation, etc. get affected, but the process of recognition of those rights has slowed down. The exemptions have been put in to where it's mandatorily required to take consent before divergence. So for say linear projects or for certain kinds of border projects, you will do away with those do away with those consent procedures, which is legally questionable. Or for that matter, there have been instances where rights already granted are being withdrawn. Or cancelled when actually the law doesn't even provide for it. So that's one part of the forest rights discussion that we're talking about. The EIA process is another process where it's not really a consent-based process, but even there, where there is a minimum requirement of public hearings and public consultation, that too is being read down. It's been the interface between the only forum where projects, government, and people can come together and actually deliberate on what should be in an area, whether the project is environmentally and socially viable. Those things are being read down. So I think a process that began almost, around 2005, 2006, you've been seeing this happen even with the National Environment Policy of 2005, 2006, has continued. And I think over a period of time has only worsened. So what we are seeing now is really a build-up of what has been happening from early 2000s in the country.
Right. Ashley, sir, there have been no details provided for how the rupees 6,000 crore promised under Compensatory Afforestation Fund Management and Planning Authority that was announced as part of the Atmanirbhar package. Has it been able to generate employment for tribals and Adivasis in areas of forestation as it claimed?
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So I think building on what my colleagues have already said, I think the first thing to understand about the compensatory afforestation, the CAMPA fund as it's called, is that it is already dirty money. We have to understand that basically this whole logic that you can deforest an area for a mining proposed project or big dam or whatever it is, and then take money from the project authorities according to some strange logic of how much per acre or per hectare forest is valued at, etc., and then put that money into something else like afforestation is itself very faulty logic, because the understanding there, which is ecologically completely fallacious, is that you can actually drown out a 1,000,000-year-old forest and then plant double the amount somewhere else and magically there'll be ecological compensation, which itself is ridiculous. Secondly, a lot of the Campa funds are used for completely wasteful purposes like bigger buildings, buying jeeps, all kinds of stuff for the forest department, and it's still the forest department that's in control of the funds, despite the repeated public demands that if there are funds like this generated, they should be going to communities who can manage the forests under the Forest Rights Act, which was earlier spoken about. Third, the Campa funds are also used for actually further disempowering communities who are already disempowered or displaced because of the so-called development projects by taking over their lands to do afforestation, including lands that should actually be recognized as community forest lands under the Forest Rights Act. So you find that systematically the whole logic of Campa, right from the beginning till the implementation phase, is faulty. And I'm not even getting into the issue of whether in fact double the amount of forest land is afforested or not. That itself is we know the abysmal record with that. That is whole another issue. So it seems to me that things like Campa or the other issues that were mentioned earlier is all a systematic process of whittling down public spaces, democratic spaces, the spaces in which there could be public participation, whether by communities or by civil society organizations, eminent environmentalists, and so on. This is there with the EA notification, it's there with CAMP, it's where virtually every step that's being taken by this government. I should, however, also mention, and this adds to what Kanchi said earlier, this is not a process started by the NDA. The NDA is actually taking environmental governance to a new depth and should certainly be held up for that. But actually, even before the 2000s, I would say 1991 marked a huge watershed in environmental governance, because with the moving of Indian economy moving into a globalized era, a globalization era, we actually started seeing the systematic weakening of hard-fought environmental regulatory measures in the 1970s and 80s. They started getting either bypassed or actually being weakened through notifications and so on, or simply ignored. Even laws and or notifications or government orders that were brought in by systematic governments in the parties in the central government were ignored by the same government. So I think this is a process that's been on for a long time, as Kanchi said, and we need to link it to, and this is my last point here, we need to link it to the fact that this is in the logic of the paradigm of development, which emphasizes industrialization, urbanization, commodification, commercialization at any cost, and literally at any cost, ecological and cost to local communities. And I think if we maintain that paradigm, every government is going to continue undermining the environment. The difference between the NDA and the previous governments is the NDA is much more efficient with it, much more ruthless with it, much less public spaces, much less spaces to send and so on. And so therefore much more dangerous, but it's in the logic of a neoliberal development model.
Right, sir. Coming back to Pradyut, sir, in creating the National Tribal Council under the Prime Minister, the NDA government has kind of overtaken the powers of the governors, the NCST, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, and the tribal advisory councils in the states. This has centralized decision making and undermined federal principles on one hand, but this has also led to accelerated environmental clearances without impact assessments. And is this excessive centralization detrimental to environmental protection?
Obviously, because see, environment is best protected by local government, by local bodies, and then community participation. See, I want to give you a very small example because I had some experience. Usually when there's a protected area, when the people live in the fringe area, this protected area cannot really be protected by lathi welding or arms welding, forest guards, because there's always a friction, there's always a kind of conflict. So, a lot of measures were taken, and finally this joint forest management concept whereby I'm not talking about wildlife protected area, because wildlife protected area is obviously a no-no. You cannot really go because it's very more stringent. But those protected areas, especially the reserve forest, that reserve forest we have seen is always best protected not by police raj, by people who live in the surrounding area. So it has to be a very symbiotic relationship. If you try to really control everything away from Delhi, that will never be successful. So participation, for people's participation in forest conservation is very important. So if it is concentrated, especially when the tribal rights, forest dependent community, as I say, they have to feel that they are stakeholders. That feeling will really protect the forest. But as you know, the present government, in the name of facilitating growth of investment, the growth of industry, and fast clearance of projects and things like this, they wanted to do everything fast track, ignoring the diverse complexities that remain in the remote places. So fast clearance you can give, and because of the fast clearance they want to give, that is why everything is concentrated in one place. So that is going to be very harmful, let me tell you this.
Right, sir. Ashish, sir, under the new environmental impact assessment, only government departments and agencies can bring notice to environmental violations. Unlike previous policies, which allowed also civil society organizations, Gram Sabhas to highlight problems. And not only that, in the past couple of years, we've seen the overall democratic spaces for dissent shrinking. Very recently, there was a legal backlash against activists expressing their concerns over EIA. What do you think is going to be the impact of this arbitrariness?
Well, I mean, like Pradeep said, unless, I think one principle that's very, very crucial for anywhere in the world is that the people who live closest to a natural resource or to a natural ecosystem have to be central to decision making with regard to that ecosystem. That's a fundamental principle of democracy. I mean, democracy means power of the people, not power of those we elect and the bureaucrats who rule us. But that has been systematically undermined for many decades. But what these recent decisions are doing is it's actually putting a final nail in the coffin of democracy in many ways, right? I think if you look at it, in earlier regimes, we had, the Ministry of Environment, for instance, has environment clearance committees, institutions for advising on what projects should or should not be cleared, whether forest clearance should be given, etc. or not. Kanchi can speak more about that. What has happened over the last few years is that those have become basically rubber stamps. The chairpersons are people who have serious conflicts of interest because there was somebody who in a dam building thing is now suddenly clearing dam projects. Obviously, he's never going to reject any, and so on. But also that the kind of civil society participation that was possible, where there were independent voices that were possible and who could dissent in these committees, are no longer there. They're not there in the National Board for Wildlife or in any of these institutions. So that's a space that's been removed. Spaces for NGOs to have dialogues with central government and the Ministry of Environment and so on are all gone, virtually not existing anymore. Attacks on dissent. Yes, you mentioned, for instance, the attack on the groups taking up the EIA notification. I've been on the board of Greenpeace India for many years. Greenpeace India has been systematically attacked on all fronts: registration, forests, foreign contribution, taxation, etc. Basically trying to shut it down because it asked uncomfortable questions about coal mining and thermal power stations and the very close chummy relationships between groups like Adani and SR and the government. So when we ask these sorts of legitimate questions, there is this kind of an attack. Again, let me repeat, it's not like it's only with the NDA. It was there earlier also, but this government has taken it to a significantly higher extent. Should also mention here, I think that there are specific regions where, in fact, this kind of attack has been, or the squeezing of democratic spaces is much worse, and we must take cognizance. Kashmir is one. And probably also Ladakh will face the same thing, where after the August last year's decision, there have been a number of decisions taken for clearing forest areas or other areas, including in protected areas, for granting project approvals and so on, and basically opening up the entire region to a much higher level of possible investments for exploitation, including for things like mining. And you can see that Kashmir is one of the areas where, in fact, there has not been so much of this for various reasons. And they're opening it up. And I wouldn't be surprised if everything that happened last year was partly, at least, an attempt to try and make this much more possible for central government and all of the industrial companies and so on to exploit that region much more. The same thing is happening with with parts of the Northeast, and of course Central India, where in the guise of fighting Naxalism, you're again opening up huge areas, or in the guise of self-reliance. No? Atmanirbhar Bharat, auctioning 40 coal blocks in the name of self-reliance is, I mean, I can't even call it a joke because it's tragic, but it's a farce. It's an absolute farce. You can't say you will destroy existing self-reliant Adivasi communities, displace them, take away all their forests and do coal mining in the name of some vague notion of self-reliance. So I think this whole, in the last few years, especially the last few months, in fact, since NDA took over a second time, these dangerous trends have actually become much worse.
Also, can I butt in? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have some other engagement, back-to-back engagement, so I have to leave this place. But I just want to give one observation as I leave now. Both Mr. Kothari is there, Mr. Kansiji is there. You see, my observation is this. It's as I told that, the present government, since 2014, they are following a path. They are doing everything, diluting, institutional support to protect. They are diluting in every manner. They are bringing in amendments. Now, probably that Forest Department itself, Forest and Environment Department, they are trying to integrate. They are, removing the regional offices. They're clubbing all these offices, including the tiger conservation projects and everything under one roof. They are trying to bring in a lot of reforms. So time will tell whether this really work in the interest of environmental protection or conservation or not. But one observation I want to tell you through this forum, when I was a forest minister for more than about 6 years, in Assam, that time I observed that there's a particular tribe of, the conservationists in every forum, every, diverse forum. Say, some people are in the tiger conservation, some people are, less participation. There are different breeds. They were, let me tell you, when they actually worked as conscience keepers. If there were any aberrations, if there were any deviations, they were so vociferous, they used to create so much noise that all forest and environment ministers or government of India would have to, they actually did have to sit up and take notice and do the course correction. They were very powerful, they were very vociferous. I can name few of them. I don't know. After NDA government has come, they've all become muted. We don't hear about them. Whether it's a tiger conservation project or other environmental forum, I don't know where have those environmentalists who used to be so powerful, so vociferous, they have all, I do not know, probably they are hiding everywhere. I know the present government uses a trishul. The trishul is in the form of 3 agencies, the ED, the income tax, and CBI. Whoever is giving a dissenting note, they would unleash that trishul and they actually the cardboard, anything, everybody is falling in line. But I don't understand why the environmentalists are keeping on. There is systematic annihilation of all kinds of, checks and balances and, all kinds of rules and regulations that used to protect environment. This is my observation. Probably you are best suited to answer this. Sorry, I'm giving you, and I'm just giving you a very personal observation. I hope I'm not correct, but then this is what my observation. Any take on this, Mr. Kothari?
Yeah, Pradipji, I think you're absolutely right with regard to one brand of environmentalists, or what I'm not even sure we would call them that, especially some of the tiger lobby and so on, who used to be very, like you're saying, very vocal and have gone silent. And one of the reasons is that, yes, they all face or are fearing that they'll be shut down, just like what I mentioned about Greenpeace India. But I think at the same time, there's another whole set of environmentalists, including those who are not necessarily even calling themselves environmentalists, but are just citizens raising a voice, who is still, and in fact, even more vociferous. For instance, on the EIA note, I think there's been a much greater voicing of opinion, public voicing of opinion, despite the fact that we know that we are going to be attacked by this government. So I think you're seeing both the trends, but I agree with you that some of the bigger NGOs, especially some of the bigger names, have unfortunately gone silent. And that's...
Anyway, Mr. Kothari, thank you very much, but let's hope that we'll be able to hold the conservation flag aloft all the time in spite of all kinds of threats and dilution of this measure. Thank you very much. I just want to bid bye from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us, sir. My last question is for Kanchi ma'am. The composition of NGT was changed to allow the government a greater control over the working of NGT. And this was done quite insidiously through a money bill. Similarly, in MBWL, the number of independent members were reduced to increase government appointees. Are independent institutions to protect the environment being systematically undermined, and why so?
Sorry, I was on mute. See, I think whether it's the NGT, which is a adjudicating body, or any of the institutions that are set up to help the government regulate, whether it's wildlife or EIA, etc. None of these institutions were ever set up. I just wanted to clarify that they were never set up to stop projects or hold back the kind of development that that any government has spoken about, whether it's the UPA earlier or it's the NDA now. They were brought in place to help governments take good decisions. They were there to actually ensure that there is sound assessments before decisions are taken. And if something goes wrong, there's justice that prevails. There's adjudication on that. So I think all these institutions, if their composition is tinkered with, or if they're full of yes men and women, then either which way, they do not serve the purpose that they're meant and set up for. So I think in the long run, we have to see any institution in the government as helping governments take good decisions for a much more long-term sustainability of those decisions, and not to actually help governments take quick, hasty decisions or take favorable decisions, which in the long run doesn't help reduce conflict, reduce impacts, and comes back to bite you, as in the case of oil fires in Assam, or gas leaks, or protests when it comes to Sterlite and etc. So I think we have to, the importance of institutions like the NGT or expert bodies is very critical. Having said that, I just wanted to say that by seeing how malleable these institutions are, and the government can actually change the compositions constantly, this is an opportunity for going ahead, whether it is through the EIA process or any other regulatory frameworks, to actually revisit how we take decisions. And I think regulatory decisions have to be democratized much more. They have to be devolved. And not just, we don't talk about decentralization from center to state or center to district. We really need to work out a system from the very beginning when it comes to what planning should be like, what kind of projects and land use change should be approved of, and if an industry or a land use change does take place, or a compensatory afforestation project comes in, who is to monitor those, the implementation of those projects? So it cannot be bodies sitting in Delhi, Guwahati, Calcutta, or even in district headquarters. We need a much more, and I think this is a very important opportunity for any government, whether it's the NDA or even people from the UP who are actually proposing suggestions. We actually come up with suggestions to be able to address those issues, and while taking each of these dilutions to any of these institutions as lessons and change that.
Right, ma'am. It is clear from what our panelists have each argued that the current framework of environmental regulations is not sustainable, and violation of environmental laws cannot be seen as development. It is imperative that the government reassess its environment policies and comes up with a comprehensive policy that actually addresses the need of the hour. Thank you for joining us today.